So Joe Biden made yet another move today to go soft on crime and pander to criminals, granting 3 pardons and reducing 75 prison sentences, nearly all, quote, non-violent drug offenders. He pardoned 52-year-old Dexter Jackson. In 2002, he allowed drug dealers to use his pool hall. He served his time, so why does he get a pardon? A clean slate. He literally worked with drug dealers, selling drugs to who knows who. Our kids? He gets a pardon. Another pardon went to 51-year-old Betty Jo Boogans. She literally moved massive amounts of cocaine around Texas with her drug-dealing boyfriend. She served 7 years in prison. Coke is no joke. It ruins lives. And Joe Biden pardons her. Why? Because radical leftist people don't believe any nonviolent drug offense is a crime, okay? But punishing illegal drugs and pushing illegal drugs can have devastating effects on communities. Crime spikes, people die. Here's White House boss Susan Rice on all this.
Why are we doing this? Not just because it's the humane thing to do, but because it's the smart thing to do to fight crime. Back in June, the president laid out a comprehensive strategy to fight violent crime and gun crime. It's putting many more cops on the street to do accountable policing. It's funding the police. It's taking ghost guns and other violent and other deadly weapons out of the hands of criminals.
Oh, give me a break. It sounds to me like they just gave a clean slate to a bunch of criminals. So at the same time they pardon criminals, Team Biden tells us they want to get back to funding the police, as you just heard there. But it's the let's defund the police movement that caused crime to skyrocket in most Democrat-run cities, like Rochester, New York, a city that cut police funding by more than $8 million over the past 2 years. Now the city is experiencing a crime wave of violence. And when the police defended themselves from criminals, prosecutors went after the cops and fired the police chief for not backing down to Black Lives Matter goons. That chief is no longer a Democrat. He says the Democrat Party turned its back on him. He's a Republican now, and he's running for Congress as one.
As Rochester, New York's chief of police, I suffered through Democratic politicians' efforts to defund and dismantle my police department and their liberal hatred of law and order for what they naively call racial justice. I am a former police chief, a former Democrat, and I'm running for Congress as a proud Republican to end the madness and fight to keep our communities safe.
Look, that chief was a victim of the madness, and he joins me now. Chief Laron Singletary, thank you so much for coming on the program.
Thank you for having me, Grant. Appreciate it.
How hard was it to say, hey, you know what, I'm going to leave the Democrat Party behind, I'm going to run as a Republican?
You know, I've always been a conservative being in law enforcement, but it wasn't hard because when politicians decide to put politics over people, it's just wrong, especially when you talk about public safety. You know, Ronald Reagan said, you can't create a desert and then give someone in that middle of the desert a cup of water and call it compassion. And for the last 2 years, the Democratic Party, the progressives within, have done just that. They created this defund the police movement, and police officers have left the force in record numbers. They retired, they resigned, and they moved to departments where they feel supported. I would have never thought I've seen progressives within a Democratic Party get behind a movement that would hurt the minority community and tear down the very fabric of our country.
All right, look, Chief, your city, Rochester, I covered it. You had a lot of Black Lives Matter riots, protests, whatever you want to call it. You had police shootings. Every police shooting and scuffle and anything else that I see, it appears to me all the officers have been cleared. You got fired because they didn't like your police department for standing up to Black Lives Matter. You're a black police chief, for crying out loud. Tell me about what that was like to go through that process.
Well, I'll tell you what, it was tough. You know, I wanted to be a police officer since I was a very young age, since I was 6 years old, and rose to the ranks to become the chief of police of a city that I love. Again, I was always conservative being in law enforcement. But I tell you what, the issue right now is going to be public safety going into the midterm elections. And right now, the individuals who went to the far left, progressive within the Democratic Party, are trying to find the way back to the center. Why? Because there's an election. So I think we must make sure that we remind individuals not to be fooled, because after the election, they'll go right back to doing the same thing, and it's hurting communities, the communities that I live in. And I'll tell you what, out of the 9 out of 10 homicide victims are African Americans, and as we saw in the last 2 years, the Defund the Police movement has created 32% increase in African American homicide victims. We are at 22 homicides right now for the city of Rochester. Last year, we were one of 17 cities that broke homicide records. We are on pace to repeat 2021. And that's why people need to go to Singletary, the number 4congress.com, and vote for me and put a former police chief in Congress.
All right, let me play a soundbite for you, Chief Singletary, from one of the council members talking about the need to defund the police. Take a listen to this.
I think it's easy to dismiss my words as lies and my voice as being a white savior, but I am echoing the words of people of color in this community who are crying out for change. And to include the pensions, I think is fair.
Chief, why is everything about race? Why can't we just put criminals in jail and keep them there and let the good people be safe, whether they're white or black?
It's because, Grant, they have no answer. And you know what? The people in this community who are African Americans, they don't want defunding the police. When I walked the streets in the neighborhoods of the city that I was police chief in, people said, Chief, we want to see more police. Not one time did someone come up and say, Chief, we want to see less police. It's ludicrous to think that individuals in the community where people are hearing gunshots. We just had a 10-year-old shot in her home, minding her own business over the weekend. And it's absolutely ridiculous. And that's why I'm running for Congress, to be a voice for that 10-year-old. People in the African-American community want more police. Why? Because these are individuals who have to live in the neighborhoods, who are often having quality of life issues, who are hearing gunshots, and they want more police. But, you know, for us in this African-American community, we must stop being dog-walked by people who think they know what's best for us. And these are oftentimes people who don't live in our communities, and we must make sure that we are out there doing the job, and as most police officers are in this country.
Well, I'll tell you what, Chief, it takes a lot of guts to run for office, especially Congress. But what you went through and standing up to Black Lives Matter, backing your police officers, I applaud you for that. And good luck in your race, sir. I appreciate you coming on. Keep us posted, okay?
Thank you so much. I sure will.
Absolutely. Good luck to you.